Perfect Strangers, 1986 to 1993. Where are they now? 39 years later. You watched Balki Bartokomous step off the plane from the tiny fictional island of Maipos with nothing but a suitcase, a sheep-herding stick, and the purest heart on television. You watched him move in with his uptight cousin Larry Appleton in a cramped Chicago apartment. And you watched the two of them turn a simple culture clash sitcom into one of the most quietly beloved shows of the entire decade. What you probably didn't watch, however, is what happened after the cameras stopped rolling in 1993. Behind that goofy, joyful theme song and the dance of joy that closed out nearly every episode, there's a story most fans never got to see. One star walked away from Hollywood entirely to renovate farmhouses in rural Pennsylvania. One actress said the sweetest man on set eventually became someone she dreaded working with. One beloved character actor is voicing one of the most famous animated characters of all time, right now, decades later. And two members of this cast are no longer with us at all. 1. The Secret Life of Cousin Larry. When Perfect Strangers first aired in March of 1986, Mark Linn-Baker was already an accomplished stage actor, having earned acclaim opposite Peter O'Toole in the 1982 film My Favorite Year. Audiences knew him as the buttoned-up straight man to Bronson Pinchot's chaos, the exasperated cousin forever trying to keep Balki's enthusiasm in check. What most viewers never realized is that Linn-Baker never actually left the theater world behind, even at the height of the show's popularity. Instead, he was quietly building an entirely separate career that would end up outlasting the sitcom by decades. In 1985, while Perfect Strangers was still finding its footing, Linn-Baker co-founded New York Stage and Film, an organization dedicated to developing new works for the stage and screen, and he still serves as its producing director today. Ironically, the actor famous for playing a Chicago newspaper photographer never really left New York at all. He returned to Broadway again and again over the following decades, appearing in revivals of On the 20th Century and You Can't Take It With You. And in 2022, he stepped into the role of Mayor Shin in the blockbuster revival of The Music Man, sharing the stage with Hugh Jackman and Sutton Foster. However, that's not where the story ends. In 2026, Linn-Baker resurfaced on network television in a way longtime fans didn't expect, joining the cast of the CBS legal drama Elsbeth as a guest star, appearing alongside fellow veteran performers Joanna Gleason and Didi Khan. He also popped up in the Marvel Studios series She-Hulk, proving that nearly 4 decades after Cousin Larry first arrived in Chicago, Mark Linn-Baker still hasn't slowed down. 2. The real reason Balki left. Hollywood Bronson Pinchot became an overnight sensation the moment Balki Bartokomous walked onto American television screens, and for a while, he was arguably the most recognizable face to come out of the entire show. But what audiences didn't know is that Pinchot would eventually walk away from Los Angeles almost entirely, and the reason had nothing to do with typical Hollywood burnout. While performing in a Broadway show years after Perfect Strangers ended, Pinchot found himself browsing real estate listings on a computer between performances, and he stumbled across something that changed the direction of his entire life. He discovered that in rural Pennsylvania, he could buy an entire historic farmhouse, land included, for roughly the cost of half a studio apartment in Manhattan. What started as a curiosity turned into an obsession. He bought one house, then another, then another. Eventually, the actor who once played a naive shepherd from a fictional island became a genuine home restoration specialist, buying and renovating crumbling historic properties in and around Hartford, Pennsylvania, a project so consuming that it eventually became the subject of his own reality series on the DIY network. Meanwhile, Pinchot never fully abandoned performing. He built a second, quieter career as an audiobook narrator, eventually recording more than 400 titles and earning recognition as one of the best voices in the entire industry for his work on literary classics. Meanwhile, unlike some actors who quietly vanish from public life, Pinchot never actually left performing behind entirely. He continued taking film and television roles for years after Perfect Strangers ended, appearing in projects across multiple genres, and he kept a presence on the stage as well, with theatrical credits stretching from regional productions to acclaimed off-Broadway runs. But here's the twist, almost nobody saw coming. In November of 2025, Pinchot gave fans a genuine scare when he shared a photo on Instagram of himself covered in scrapes and bruising after face-planting on concrete during a fall down a set of slippery stairs. In the caption, he described the injury in his trademark blunt humor, explaining that he'd waited nearly a full day before finally going to get checked out, joking that he was simply too exhausted and too proud to ask for help sooner. Fans flooded his page with prayers, many of them referencing his old character directly, and wishing health to both Bronson and, jokingly, to Serge, the eccentric art gallery character he'd played decades earlier in Beverly Hills Cop. Within a day, Pinchot returned with an update confirming there was no concussion, no facial fractures, and no serious internal injury, just what he jokingly called battle scars. The man who once played the most lovable immigrant on television is still very much out there today, restoring old houses in rural Pennsylvania, narrating audiobooks by the hundreds, showing up at fan conventions to reprise Balky's mannerisms one more time, and occasionally giving his fans a minor heart attack on social media in the process. 3. The two actresses the show almost forgot. Every fan of Perfect Strangers remembers Jennifer and Mary Ann, the two flight attendants who eventually became the love interests of Larry and Balky after the show quietly phased out its original female lead. What most viewers never realized is just how different these two women's post-show paths would become, and how their real-life bond may have outlasted almost everything else connected to the series. Melanie Wilson, who played the sharp, grounded Jennifer, was the daughter of Dick Wilson, the actor famous for playing Mr. Whipple in decades of charming commercials. After Perfect Strangers wrapped, Wilson kept working steadily throughout the 90s, picking up guest appearances on Step by Step and Family Matters. However, everything changed in 1996 when she married television producer William Bickley, one of the very executive producers who had helped steer Perfect Strangers during its later seasons. She had her first daughter the following year, and by her own account, she had quietly lost her passion for acting around the same time. She shifted toward voiceover work and eventually stepped away from the industry almost entirely to raise her family, and she remains married to Bickley to this day. Rebeca Arthur, meanwhile, who played the effervescent Mary Ann, continued acting steadily through the 2010s before eventually stepping back from Hollywood too. But here's what audiences really didn't expect. In 2022, Arthur broke her silence about what she described as a troubling shift in Bronson Pinchot's behavior on set, telling an interviewer that he began sweet and fun to work with, but eventually became someone she felt singled her out for mistreatment. It was a surprising crack in the nostalgia surrounding one of television's most wholesome sitcoms. Despite that, Arthur has said she and Melanie Wilson remain close friends to this day, decades after playing best friends on screen. In the years since, Arthur has largely reinvented herself, running a clothing business built around a charitable foundation that supports women. And in 2024, she made a rare return to the stage for a one-night-only theatrical reading in her hometown of Cumberland, Maryland, telling a local reporter that it had been nearly 30 years since she'd stood in front of an audience, and that she couldn't think of a better place to return to the boards than her own hometown. Two very different women, two very different post-show lives, and yet somehow, according to Arthur herself, still just as close today as they were playing best friends and roommates on screen all those decades ago. 4. The almost failed pilot. Nobody talks about before Perfect Strangers became a TGIF cornerstone. It was almost a very different show entirely. And the version that eventually made it to air came together in a way most fans have never heard. Series creator Dale McRaven built the concept around the classic culture clash format, positioning conservative, uptight Larry Appleton against his exuberant, wide-eyed cousin, Balky, a shepherd from the fictional Mediterranean island of Mypos. What audiences didn't realize is just how much of a gamble the network was actually taking. When the show premiered in March of 1986, it was placed directly between two already established hits, Who's the Boss? And Moonlighting, essentially as a mid-season experiment to see if it could hold its own in that coveted slot. Remarkably, it worked immediately. 5 of the show's first 6 episodes landed inside the weekly Nielsen Top 10, an instant validation that took even the network somewhat by surprise. However, success didn't mean smooth sailing. For its second season, ABC actually moved the show to Wednesday nights to help launch an entirely different sitcom, Head of the Class. And it was during this shuffle that the show quietly phased out Susan Campbell, its original female lead, in favor of the two flight attendants who would go on to define the series. Eventually, the show would settle into Friday nights, where it became a foundational piece of the network's now legendary TGIF programming block, airing for 8 full seasons and 150 episodes in total, all the way through August of 1993. It never won a major industry award during its run, and Bronson Pinchot's early Emmy nomination for lead actor in a comedy series didn't ultimately convert into a win. But, ironically, the show's staying power in reruns and streaming has arguably outpaced plenty of its more decorated competitors from that same era. 5. The Boss Nobody Remembers was recast. Here's a detail that even longtime fans tend to forget. In the very first season of Perfect Strangers, Larry and Balky's boss at the Ritz discount store wasn't the character audiences associate with the role today. Instead, the couple's landlord and employer was Donald Twincasetti, played by actor Ernie Sabella, alongside his on-screen wife Edwina, played by Belita Moreno. When Sabella departed the show after its second season, the writers made an unusual choice. Rather than recasting the role entirely, they kept Belita Moreno on the show and transformed her into an entirely new character altogether. The sharp-tongued Lydia Markham at the Chicago Chronicle, complete with a dramatically different hairstyle to disguise the fact that audiences were watching the same actress play two distinct people within the same series. It's the kind of behind-the-scenes sleight of hand that most viewers never noticed at all. As for where Sabella ended up, the answer might be the single most surprising twist in this entire story. Ernie Sabella went on to become the voice of Pumbaa, the warthog from Disney's The Lion King, a role he has now voiced across multiple films, television series, and stage productions for over 3 decades, making him one of the most quietly prolific character actors in modern entertainment. Belita Moreno, meanwhile, found her own second wind, years later landing the role of Benny Lopez, mother to the title character on the long-running sitcom George Lopez, ultimately appearing in well over 100 episodes. She has remained married to talent agent Joel Rudnick since 1982, and continued picking up television roles well into the 2020s, proving that both halves of the Twincasetti household found lasting success long after leaving that discount store behind. 6. The grumpy boss who became a household name. Twice over. If there's one actor from this cast whose post-Perfect Strangers career quietly eclipsed the show itself, it's Sam Anderson. On the series, he played Mr. Gorpley, Balky's endlessly irritated supervisor in the mailroom of the Chicago Chronicle, a man who never warmed to Balky no matter how many years passed. What audiences likely didn't realize at the time is that Anderson was already a seasoned character actor with credits stretching back to the late 1970s, and Perfect Strangers was just one stop on an extraordinarily long career. After the show ended, Anderson kept working constantly, eventually landing a role that would make him a cult favorite to an entirely new generation of viewers. Dentist Bernard Nadler on the ABC phenomenon Lost, a performance so beloved that fans still bring it up in interviews with him decades later. He also appeared as the mysterious lawyer Holland Manners on Angel, and famously played the principal in Forrest Gump. However, here's the part that might genuinely shock longtime fans checking in on him today. As of 2026, Sam Anderson is not retired. At 79 years old, he's currently appearing as a series regular on the CBS reboot of Matlock, playing Edwin, the supportive husband of Kathy Bates' title character, in what has become one of the more surprising network hits of the past year. In a recent interview, Anderson joked that 75 is the new 50, and watching his ongoing career, it's hard to argue otherwise. Nearly 40 years after playing one of the pettiest bosses on 1980s television, Sam Anderson is still working steadily, still landing major roles, and still proving that character actors, not just leading men, can have the longest careers in the business. 7. The Boss Who Replaced the Boss. After Mr. Gorpley arrived at the Chronicle, the show introduced yet another authority figure into Larry and Balky's professional lives. R.T. Wainwright, Larry's blustering, easily exasperated editor, played by veteran character actor F.J. O'Neill beginning in the show's 3rd season. Wainwright became a fixture for the next several years, delivering the kind of exasperated one-liners that defined so much of the show's workplace comedy. Unfortunately, this next update carries a somber note. F.J. O'Neill passed away in 2022, in his early 90s, closing out a long career built almost entirely on these kinds of gruff, memorable supporting roles across decades of American television. His death, alongside the loss of the show's own creator that same year, marked a genuinely difficult 12 months for fans of this particular sitcom universe. It's easy to forget, watching old reruns, that these actors were real people living full lives long after the cameras stopped rolling, and O'Neill's passing is a quiet reminder of just how much time has actually gone by since Perfect Strangers first aired. 8. The man who never got to see the spin-off take over. Dale McRaven created Perfect Strangers in 1986 after already making television history a decade earlier as the co-creator of Mork and Mindy, the show that launched Robin Williams into superstardom. What most casual fans never knew is that McRaven actually left Perfect Strangers over creative differences fairly early in its run, stepping back from day-to-day production after just a couple of seasons, though he continued sending script notes from a distance for years afterward. Ironically, the writer responsible for creating this cozy, family-friendly sitcom retired from show business entirely in the mid-1990s, turning his full attention toward wildlife and landscape photography for the remainder of his life. McRaven passed away in September of 2022 at his home in Porter Ranch, California, at the age of 83, following complications from lung cancer. In the years before his death, he was remembered by colleagues as something of a star maker, credited with discovering not just Robin Williams and Pam Dawber, but also Mark Hamill, Bronson Pinchot, and Mark Linn-Baker himself, an extraordinary legacy for one writer to leave behind across a career spanning multiple generations of American sitcoms. 9. The spin-off star fighting her way back. One of the most quietly significant characters to walk through the Chicago Chronicle's doors was Harriet Winslow, the sharp, no-nonsense elevator operator, played by Jo Marie Payton. What most viewers don't remember is that Harriet wasn't actually created for her own show. She began right here on Perfect Strangers, before the character proved so popular that producers spun her off into her own series entirely. Family Matters, the sitcom that would eventually introduce the world to Steve Urkel and become one of the defining shows of the entire TGIF era. It's a rare case of a background character growing into a genuine television institution. However, this next update comes with real concern attached. In April of 2026, Jo Marie Payton revealed to fans that she had suffered a stroke that temporarily left her unable to walk or speak, requiring months of intensive rehabilitation to relearn both. In a video shared around Easter of that year, the 75-year-old actress appeared using a walker, telling fans directly that it had been a long 5 months, but that she intended to come back, urging her supporters that slow and steady wins the race. She had already made a public appearance the previous month at a women's empowerment event in Florida, seated in a wheelchair, where she told the crowd simply to stay true to themselves no matter what, to be faithful to who they are, no exceptions. Though Payton hasn't disclosed the full scope of her medical situation, her willingness to document the recovery so openly, walker and all, has struck a chord with fans who grew up watching her command a room, whether behind that elevator panel at the Chicago Chronicle or in Harriet Winslow's own kitchen years later. Fans have since flooded her social media with prayers and encouragement, with one supporter writing that she looked marvelous despite everything she'd been through, and another simply praying for her continued healing. It's a reminder of just how deeply this actress and this small newspaper elevator operator she originated decades ago, before an entire spin-off was built around her, remain embedded in American pop culture, and how much genuine love still exists for her all these years later. 10. The character who vanished without explanation. Long before Jennifer and Mary Ann moved into the building, Larry Appleton actually had a completely different love interest during the show's very first season. Susan Campbell, his platonic-turned-romantic upstairs neighbor, played by actress Lisa Cutter. What most fans never fully processed is how abruptly this character disappeared. Susan was quietly phased out early in Season 2, right as the show shifted its entire romantic structure toward the two flight attendants who would define the series for the remainder of its run. Cutter's own career took an interesting turn away from comedy entirely, as she went on to appear in a string of dramas and thrillers throughout the late 80s and early 90s, including a supporting role in the Robert Redford film Havana. Unlike several of her former castmates, Cutter's screen career wound down by the mid-90s, and she has largely stayed out of the public eye ever since, making her one of the more genuine mysteries among the show's early cast members. 11. The Child Star. Hiding in plain sight. Here's one almost nobody remembers, and it might be the single biggest surprise on this entire list. Back in Season 6, Perfect Strangers brought in a young guest actress to play Tess Holland, a small role that came and went in a single episode. What virtually no casual viewer connected at the time is that this same young performer, Allison Porter, had already starred in several other major projects as a child, and would go on to have one of the most unexpected comeback stories in reality television. Porter had been acting professionally since she was a toddler, eventually landing the title role in the 1991 hit film Curly Sue opposite Jim Belushi, alongside a stretch of other film and television credits throughout the late 80s and early 90s. However, like so many child stars, her path through adolescence and young adulthood wasn't smooth. Porter has been open about struggling with drug and alcohol addiction as a young adult, a battle she eventually overcame after achieving sobriety. Then, in 2016, in a twist nobody saw coming, the former child actress walked onto the stage of The Voice and blew the judges away during her blind audition, ultimately winning the entire season under coach Christina Aguilera, becoming the first winner Aguilera had ever coached to victory. Now, a full decade after that win, Porter is still actively releasing music. In 2026, time to mark the 10th anniversary of her Voice victory, she released a new single called Race to Nowhere, continuing a musical career built on raw, emotional vocals. She's also become a vocal coach on The Masked Singer, a side career, she says, began almost by accident during the pandemic, and has since grown into one of the most rewarding parts of her professional life. She married in 2023, is now raising a family of her own, and by all accounts is thriving, decades removed from that single forgettable guest spot as Tess Holland. It's a genuinely wild detail hiding inside this show's background cast list. One of the winners of The Voice appeared in a single episode of Perfect Strangers decades before anyone knew her name. 12. The reunion nobody expected to actually happen. For years, fans of Perfect Strangers assumed that genuine, unscripted reunions between Mark Linn-Baker and Bronson Pinchot were largely a thing of the past. Then, at a Fan Expo appearance years ago, the two men did something that instantly went viral among longtime viewers. Pinchot turned to his former co-star and asked if he wanted to slip back into character. And after a moment of hesitation, the two of them fell right back into Balky and Larry's exact comedic rhythm, right there in front of fans, as if no time had passed at all. What audiences didn't expect is that this wouldn't be a one-time novelty confined to a single convention appearance. As 2026 rolled around, marking roughly 4 decades since the show's original premiere in March of 1986, both actors leaned even further into the nostalgia. Pinchot shared celebratory posts on social media, marking what he called 40 years of Balky and Cousin Larry, joking in the caption that the two of them were still doing the Dance of Joy together, and fans responded in the comments by pointing out how naturally both men had aged into what one follower jokingly called their casual hipster chic era. The renewed attention coincided with a genuine wave of nostalgia conventions across the country embracing the show's anniversary. Pinchot has continued making appearances on the multi-fandom convention circuit throughout 2025 and 2026, including at events built specifically around 90s television nostalgia, sharing panels and autograph sessions with fans who grew up watching him navigate Chicago as a wide-eyed immigrant from MyPose. Meanwhile, online, entire new video compilations and cast retrospectives dedicated specifically to the show's 40th anniversary began circulating in early 2026, introducing the series to viewers who weren't even alive during its original run. For a series that quietly ended its network run back in 1993 without ever winning a major industry award, and without ever posting the kind of blockbuster ratings that defined some of its TGIF stablemates, the sustained genuine affection fans still show toward this particular cast, all these decades later, is something very few sitcoms of that era can honestly claim. 13. Where the show actually lives today. Given how long ago Perfect Strangers left the air, you might assume it's the kind of show that's faded into obscurity, buried in a network vault somewhere. The reality is exactly the opposite. Reruns of the series have remained in steady syndication and streaming rotation for over 3 decades now, continually introducing new generations of viewers to Balky's earnest confusion over American customs and Larry's increasingly futile attempts to maintain order in his own apartment. The show's theme song alone, Nothing's Gonna Stop Me Now, performed by David Pomeranz, has taken on a strange life of its own, regularly resurfacing in nostalgia, compilations, and even inspiring cover versions from fans decades after it first played over those opening credits. What's remarkable, watching the show today, is how much of its charm still holds up precisely because it never leaned on shock value or edgy humor. It was built entirely on the warmth between two mismatched cousins, and that warmth is exactly what continues drawing new viewers into digging through old episodes online. Fan communities dedicated to cataloging behind-the-scenes trivia, tracking down obscure guest stars, and interviewing surviving cast members have only grown more active as the show's anniversary approached, proof that a series doesn't need blockbuster ratings or awards to leave a lasting cultural footprint. It just needs 2 guys, 1 apartment, and a whole lot of heart. 14. The legacy nobody predicted, back in 1986. When Perfect Strangers premiered in the spring of 1986, filling a coveted time slot between Who's the Boss and Moonlighting, network executives had no way of knowing they were launching something that would eventually influence an entire decade of family television. The show ran for 8 seasons and 150 episodes total, eventually becoming a foundational piece of ABC's now legendary TGIF programming block, alongside the very spin-off it helped create. What's remarkable, looking back, is how many of these actors' careers ended up intertwining again and again over the following decades, long after Balky and Larry said their final goodbyes in that Chicago apartment. Mark Linn-Baker guest starred on Family Matters as a different character, and even directed an episode of the show, while separately popping up on Full House playing Dick Donaldson, the wealthy, snobbish cousin of Becky Katsopoulos. Melanie Wilson also crossed over into Family Matters as a different character. Sam Anderson went on to work alongside some of the biggest names in television history, from delivering Phoebe's triplets on Friends to comforting grieving castaways on Lost, and at nearly 80 years old, he's still landing series regular roles on network hits in 2026. Ernie Sabella became the voice of one of Disney's most enduring characters, carrying Pumbaa's laugh across 3 decades of films, sequels, and stage productions. Belita Moreno found an entirely second act as a beloved sitcom mother on George Lopez. Even a background guest star, a young girl who appeared in a single forgettable episode, went on to win an entire season of The Voice on national television. And even as some members of this cast, like F.J. O'Neill and series creator Dale McRaven, are no longer with us, and others, like Jo Marie Payton, are currently fighting hard through difficult health battles, the affection surrounding this particular show has never really faded. Nearly 40 years later, Perfect Strangers remains a strange, sincere little time capsule of 80s and 90s television, proof that a show doesn't need trophies or record-breaking ratings to leave a permanent mark on the people who grew up watching it. It just needs 2 guys, 1 Chicago apartment, and the kind of chemistry that apparently never actually goes away, even decades later, even at a random fan convention, even when nobody was expecting it. So here's the real question. Which member of this cast surprised you the most? Was it discovering that Bronson Pinchot walked away from Hollywood almost entirely to restore old farmhouses in rural Pennsylvania? Was it learning that Ernie Sabella is the voice behind Pumbaa? Or that a 1-episode guest star from Season 6 grew up to win The Voice? Or was it hearing about Jo Marie Payton's ongoing recovery and wanting to send her your own support? Let us know in the comments below which Perfect Strangers cast member you'd most want to see reunite on screen one more time, and whether you think Balky and Larry could still pull off the dance of joy exactly like they used to. If you enjoyed taking this trip back to that Chicago apartment nearly 40 years later, make sure to like this video and subscribe for more deep dives into the beloved shows that shaped an entire generation of television. There are plenty more forgotten stories from the golden age of the American sitcom still waiting to be told, and we'll see you in the next one.